Good morning, everyone. It is 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, July 10th, 2019, and my microphone is on. I'm not used to that. Okay. Good morning, everyone. We'll call this meeting of the Fergus Falls City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Roll call, please.
Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
We have a quorum. First item on the agenda is a discussion on an update from the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and I'll call on Elizabeth Waithel. Thank you.
Great.
Waithel, thank you for being here this morning, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'm just going to hand these out. It's actually two separate reports, but I'll pass both of them out. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. As he said, my name is Elizabeth Waithel, and I am one of the attorney lobbyists with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. I want to thank you for allowing me to be here. I think I know most of you, but for those of you who are newer to the council, it's great to meet you, and I just want to emphasize what an important part of the coalition Fergus Falls has long been. Mayor Shire and your previous mayor have, been on our board, very active in the coalition, and in fact, we're giving Mayor Shire, is it Shear or Shire?
This morning is Shear, but normally it's Shire.
Shire. We're giving Mayor Shire an award, and we'll pronounce it correctly at the end of the month up in Bemidji. The coalition is an organization of 97 cities throughout the state, and we work on issues that are directly impact Greater Minnesota, like local government aid, environmental regulation, annexation, land use, economic development, and transportation. This session, things were a little bit different. I want to give you a little bit about that backdrop and how it affected things. I think, as you're well aware, we had a new governor, and for the first time in a long time, it was actually a governor from Greater Minnesota, and we think that had an impact. We also had a change in the control of the House. Not only was it a change in party, but maybe for the first time, we had a DFL House majority that was dominated by the suburbs rather than Greater Minnesota or the inner city. And then finally, there was no change in the Senate, but it was controlled by the GOP. This all left us with the only divided legislature in the country. And there were also a lot of expectations from the public given the last couple sessions. There was a real desire for transparency, bipartisanship, and an end to acrimony. I'll let you guys decide at the end whether that happened or not. But this change also really set up sort of a very different competing visions of the budget and the tax debate, and that really impacted almost everything else we're going to talk about. There was a bipartisan agreement that the forecasted state budget surplus was probably not reliable, that it wasn't going to be what we think it will be, or what it is now in the future. For example, there was $1.5 billion projected in November. That forecast went down to $1 billion in February, with an even smaller surplus in the future. But the parties took very different approaches to how to approach that. The DFL viewed it as a revenue problem, and so to address it, they proposed a tax increase on gas, as well as an extension of the provider taxes. However, the Republicans viewed it as a spending problem, and they proposed tax cuts and spending cuts. And it was that sort of tension between those two visions about how to address our budget that really affected almost everything that happened. Our goals, probably not a surprise to anyone who knows us, top on the list was trying to get LGA back to that 2002 level. We really also wanted a bonding bill to get money for wastewater, child care, economic development. We were hoping for child care grants for training and business development, and as well as a comprehensive transportation package. Let's start with the gold. It's been a while, but it's not been a while. It's been a number of years that we've been working on this, but we have finally achieved our goal of getting LGA back to that 2002 level, and a big gold medal for everybody who's been involved in that struggle over the years. If you've been around a long time, you'll remember that LGA hit its high water mark back in 2002 at $64 million, but the next year it was cut by almost $100 million, and then we saw further cuts all the way through 2012 when it hits low water mark of $425 million. We've been pushing and have achieved increases over the last several years, but the goal has really been to get it back up to that 2002 level, and we achieved that this year in the tax bill. going into the session, success was not certain. We had some good things going for us. One of the things that the coalition does, and it's working with our members, I know, again, Mayor Shire was very active in this, is really reaching out to candidates in advance to make sure they understand, our vision for Greater Minnesota. And Governor Walz seemed to really catch on to that vision of local government aid for, an increase in local government aid. So that was very helpful. We also had a House tax chair from Dilworth, Minnesota, former mayor, now representative and tax chair Paul Marquardt, who is also an LGA champion. On the negatives, the challenges we had a Senate tax chair who was very hostile to LGA, and quite frankly, that made it difficult. We also had new DFL legislators who wanted to see perhaps some other forms of tax relief, like renters relief and homeowners relief. But we never take a fight lying down, and it was relentless advocacy almost from the get-go. We proposed two bills that had $30.5 million increase, really statewide media presence, guest columns, press conferences, multiple action alerts, and really, really high member engagement. And that makes such a huge difference, and that's why it's so important we have active members. And then our lobbyists really took nothing for granted, meeting repeatedly with legislators, beginning a session, middle of session, every day, almost hourly as we're getting to the close of session. And sort of working together, we achieved our goal of restoring LGA with a $30 million increase. So what does that mean for Fergus Falls? Well, it means, close to $100,000 increase for you next year. Now, I said there was a $30 million increase for reasons that are not entirely clear to me. They split it over 2 years, so there's a $26 million increase to the total pool coming this year, and then another $4 million next year. So that should continue to increase for all of our cities in the future. But we're very pleased with that. After years of seeing diminishing or flat LGA, we are very happy to be seeing it going forward. Of course, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong way. The fight is never over. We are very pleased with this result, but it's also important to remember that we got it back to that LGA number of 2002 that doesn't include inflation. So that's kind of the next thing, one of the next things we're going to be working out. We also want to keep in mind that economic downturns happen and that LGA cuts are often, something that get targeted. We're also going to be watching the rise of suburban legislators and what happens with LGA. And then finally, we are going to be taking a look at the formula this summer to make sure that it still is working for our members. So we remain committed to continuing to preserve and strengthen LGA. We know it's such an important part of our members' budget, and that working together, we've been able to, preserve the program and strengthen it, and we'll continue to do that for generations. But the next big issue that we've really started working on over the last 2 to 3 years is child care. And I would say almost every one of our member cities has been affected in one way or another. There is a significant shortage throughout the state, but it's particularly acute in Greater Minnesota, with a 35,000 slot shortage just in Greater Minnesota. And really that affects our economic development. We came up with a policy framework to try and adjust that. The first thing we're proposing was $3 million for our initiative foundations who have a real expertise in this area, as well as $10 million for capital facility grants to try and help build new facilities in Greater Minnesota. Sorry, I keep gonna get that button right. I'm going the wrong way again. Really led the advocacy and really pulled together a coalition. We even got the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce working with us on this. And, they're not always sort of advocacy partners with us. We also really engaged the Greater Minnesota Partnership, which, Fergus Falls and a number of our other members are also participate in. Built a coalition with child care leaders, extensive media coverage, and we think that really helped. We were getting, newspapers and other media across the state to really recognize this program and endorse our proposals. Multiple legislative hearings, and then a grassroots effort that really had a lot of our members reaching out to the governor, reaching out to legislators. And when they start hearing that, it really starts to kick in. And the advocacy paid off. With our, we were able to get $750,000 for the initiative foundations. Not everything we wanted, but sometimes the first year in a program, you got to start small and continue to grow that. $750,000 for a deed program. We were also pleased to see that the House included $10 million in the bonding bill, but I'm going to say probably our biggest disappointment this year was what happened, but that is something we will push on again next year. We think it's really important that that gets done. So I think that the biggest takeaway from this is that, not only did we achieve legislative success, but we have really elevated this issue in the public attention, in legislators' attention, and that is what lays groundwork for the future. Just to for Greater Minnesota for airports. Clean water. This is what I spent a lot of my time working on. Back in 2018, we were very, very, very excited when we got $123 million for clean water. Unfortunately, the legislature funded a large chunk of that through a controversial appropriation bond method. And what ended up happening was in October, as they were about to sell the bonds, a lawsuit was filed. And when there is a lawsuit out there about bonds, you can't sell them. They basically become worthless. And so we did not take a position on whether or not the bonds were good idea or bad idea. We just told them, you need to solve this, resolve the lawsuit or replace the bonds. A lot of media effort, had, statewide columns on this, got everybody's attention. Unfortunately, there was no action before session. So we introduced legislation for $128 million for the PFA that would have covered those bonds that were held up by the lawsuit, as well as the $67 million increase. And, one of the reasons we're pushing for that and pushing every year is that, quite frankly, if you're not being affected this year, you probably will over the next 5 years. A lot of cities are either having to upgrade their wastewater, drinking water facilities, stormwater facilities, and if we don't continue to put large amounts of money into the PFA, as well as looking for regulatory reform to try and keep those costs down, we're just not going to be able to keep up, and it's going to create even more of a crisis. Really, again, a full court press at the legislature on this, multiple hearings, a lot of media attention, and finally, in March, the governor and the legislature agreed to fix last year's problem. But quite frankly, that wasn't enough, so we continued to push for the additional $67 million, and we were able to get a large chunk of that included in the House proposal, but ultimately, like I said, that failed to gain traction at the end of the session. We will continue to push for it next year because we think it is extremely important for our communities. Transportation. Going into the session, we were hoping something would happen because I think there's one thing legislators seem to agree on, and that's that we need to do more about transportation. It's what we do that gets to be the problem. The CGMC proposed money for city streets, money for both cities over 5,000 and under 5,000, as well as more money for corridors of commerce and protecting the money that is going into the existing corridors of commerce program. Unfortunately, the Senate and House had very different approaches on this that reflected those philosophies. The House proposed increasing gas tax, tab fees, and sales tax. But they also proposed, and I think this is important, permanent funding for small cities, in a way we haven't seen before, as well as $50 million for city streets. And that's not, just the MSAS streets, but that's, all streets, which has been a big need for our cities over 5,000. And they also included $300 bonding in the corridors of commerce. On the flip side, the Senate did not include any investment. They cut the corridors of commerce program. They did propose money for small cities, but it was $250,000, which works out to about $350 per city. So if you think about it, a city could have bought a stop sign, but they couldn't have installed it with that money. But at the end of the day, there was no compromise. They could not seem to find a way to meet in the middle. The Senate drew a line in the sand on the tax fee increase, and the House gave up in exchange for extending the provider tax to sustain other areas of the budget. Silver linings for us. Through our advocacy, we were at least able to fend off cuts to the corridors of commerce proposal, and we also, again, it didn't end up in the final bill, but the fact that it was there in the House, having a historic investment in city streets is really important and is something we are going to be pushing for next year because that really benefits all of our members. So this is a quote from my colleague Shane, who does transportation, that the 2019 session was defined by bold proposals and little willingness to compromise. So what did we learn from this session? I think the biggest lesson to take away is that success really requires persistence. We have been working and pushing hard, not only during this session, but over the last several years on, increasing LGA, and it finally paid off. We've been raising attention to childcare over the last couple of years, again, finally paying off. It's that persistent effort that's really important. We also learned a little bit about the legislature and its new makeup and what we're going to have to do. What we saw with the suburban-led House DFL is they're more willing to invest money in programs, but they're a little less willing to support greater Minnesota-specific projects. The Senate, on the flip side, a little less willing to invest in new spending, but they do recognize the importance of greater Minnesota-specific programs. We also recognize, quite frankly, that engaging Governor Walz early is really crucial on some of the success because he's shown an ability to help bring those two sides together. So engaging sort of with all three will be really important. Looking ahead, again, we'll be discussing potential changes to the formula as well as looking at, how do we, in the future index it. Really going to be pushing for a large bonding bill. Wastewater and water funding will be a priority, as will childcare and economic development. We really would like to see a comprehensive transportation package, but we're going to be realistic. Right now, given the huge divide we are seeing between the Senate and the House, that is not likely. We anticipate they will probably put money in bonding towards transportation and then try and use the transportation issue as a way to beat up on each other during the election. The election year, we will be focused on educating candidates and the public on our issues because we think that really matters. And as we saw with the governor and some of the new legislators, it works. So we're beginning now to prepare for a successful session. Couple upcoming events. 2 weeks from now, it's not too late to sign up. I think I even put the sign-up sheets in your packet. We have our summer conference in Bemidji, and if you haven't been to one of those, it's a great event. We spend a lot of time. There's a great opportunity to, quite frankly, meet with the other cities, which is some people's favorite part of the part of the event. We'll be having a discussion on housing issues and how do we address that. Interactive discussion that will be led by some of our board members on what cities are doing and how we can tackle problems for the future. We've got Deed Commissioner Steve Grove coming. We're very excited about that. We tried to get Dayton's Deed Commissioner there for 4 years. Never happened, but we got the new one in there on our first try. It's going to be a really great event if you can come up for it. And on Thursday night, again, like I said, we'll be giving the mayor an award. If you can't make that, not far from here is the Fall Conference. That's one of our better attended events, 2 days, and that's getting us ready for the legislative session. And then finally, I would say in terms of numbers, our biggest event is the Legislative Action Day. It's gotten so big we had to move it to a hotel. We get together, we usually bring in legislative leaders. We had the governor there this year. And it's really our opportunity sort of to go out in force and work with our legislators on these key issues that we'll be talking about next session. So I hope you can join us for at least one of those events. I do want to thank you. As I mentioned, Fergus Falls traditionally, former Mayor Leland and now Mayor Shire and just other members, I know your city administrator, or city manager, has been very active as well. It really makes a difference in what we are able to do. It's that combination of sort of the policy knowledge that we bring and then working together with our members that has made us an extremely successful organization. So I want to thank you. On that, I also want to point out the other report that I included with that. In addition to working with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, I also work with the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Organization. And actually, your Parks and Trails Director, Steve Plaza, is a very active member. He's chair of our membership committee. But I wanted to bring that report along and thank you for your membership in that organization as well. The email is on the report if you want to get on our newsletter. But we've been working actively to push for actively and successfully to get more money towards programs that benefit Parks and Trails in Greater Minnesota. So, are there any questions? I know that's a lot of information, and there's even more in the reports that I gave you. So.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I have one question. So you mentioned some of the items in the failed bonding bill that the leadership had agreed upon and kind of fell apart at the end. Is there any talk or any hope that that still gets addressed with the insulin bill?
It's there's chattering behind the scenes. I think that there's and it's the one thing I guess I should have referenced. There's what we call the phantom bonding bill. There was actually my colleague Shane discovered this. There was a bonding bill that was put together that was worth $500 million that actually someone accidentally posted on the legislative pages the day after the legislative session ended, and we found it. We screen captured it, and they removed it, and it was gone within 2 hours. So that's why we call it the phantom bonding bill. It was never actually introduced, but it included money for wastewater, quite frankly, for a lot of our city projects, for transportation and whatnot. So there was sort of the bare bones of a proposal out there, but nobody knows exactly what happened. I would say there's chatter about a bonding bill because there's that desire to deal with the insulin issue, but I will say I'm skeptical that it will come together. For those of you who were here in 2016, you might remember that there was a bonding bill that they had put together. It was closer to $1 billion, and that was an actual bonding year. And due to partisan fighting literally at midnight on the last day of session, it failed. And quite frankly, that entire year, up until December, there was discussion about a special session for bonding, and it never happened. And my fear is that is what will happen. So I would say there's discussions behind the scenes. It's something that I work a lot on bonding. My colleague Bradley does work on bonding, and we continue to meet, with the various parties. But I would say it's a possibility, but it's possible, not probable. I think if they do a special session to address the insulin issue, I think there's a pretty good chance that might happen. It would be a very small bill and very focused on emergency items. Given the past history of the last couple of years, I'm just skeptical about that ability. With a special session, usually there's sort of an acknowledgement that you have to have an agreement between the legislature and the governor on what's in that session. I mean, that's not required by law, but that's usually the practice, and they just seem to have difficulty coming together on that final agreement. And with bonding, you need more than a majority. You actually need a supermajority, and that can be hard to get. I'll be honest, I think part of the challenge with getting the bonding is that there were quite a few people who were just like, we don't need it this year. We can do it in the even year. And I don't know that they can get that number. I mean, if an emergency pops up, we might see it happen, but I'm skeptical. Sorry, I don't mean to be gloom and doom on a rainy morning.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Yeah.
I noticed that you establishing a relationship with the new MPCA commissioner, obviously given all the things that the MPCA is, accelerating and taken to a higher level and standard, how did you find her willingness to accept some input? We are working on building that relationship. It is a different approach than Commissioner Stein. Commissioner Stein I don't mean this in a bad way. He was a career-long bureaucrat. I mean, he went between Department of Health, DNR, and MPCA. So we had a very different approach to this. Commissioner Bishop, is coming after 17 years of being over at Best Buy, and she also, she had been, I think, in the Department of Administration, but this is not her turf that she's defending, if that makes sense. I don't want to, be insulting to the previous one, but she does have a different approach. I've also met with her several times, and she definitely, and I mean this probably in a good way, she acts like a businesswoman. Like, she's been in businesses and a lot more, she acts in a way that I've observed that's a lot more like, let's get to the point, how do we solve this? And I think that's helpful. She still has the obligations, obviously, of, complying with the Clean Water Act. And sort of, one advantage that Commissioner Stein had over her is he had just a much better, steeped in knowledge of how all this works. But she's been, more willing to deal. This wasn't for the coalition, but it sort of supported some efforts. We also represent the city of Mankato, and we had to do some dealings on some legislation and relating to with their permit. And I think we were able to sort of come together on a settlement that will engage not just Mankato, but a lot of the cities along the Minnesota River. And I think that was an achievement we might not have seen under the previous commissioner.
And so I think we're seeing some strides towards a more cooperative working relationship. So I would say, we still have a ways to go in terms of what this looks like, but she's shown a willingness and an understanding of the need to repair that relationship. And then I think her background in business is also sort of informing the way that she looks at things. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
And any other questions for Elizabeth? Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the
Yeah.
Greater Minnesota Cities.
Thank you. And again, thank you to Fergus. We really appreciate everything you guys do. So take care.
Thanks.
Thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda is Glacial Edge Trail discussion. I'll call on Ryan Miller.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, members of the committee. I do have 3 items to discuss regarding the Glacial Edge Trail. The first is a recommendation to approve an agreement with Ottertail County to develop an amendment to the Glacial Edge Trail Master Plan. This item was originally introduced back at the March 13th City Council meeting. But a little bit of a background on this. So late last year, city staff met with county staff to discuss the possibility of amending the Glacial Edge Trail Master Plan, which the city approved in 2017. The amended master plan would include a new section of the trail from the city limits of Fergus Falls to Maplewood State Park along County Road 1 and 3. The city and the county are interested in considering consolidating the trail plans in order to leverage trail planning efforts and strengthen future funding applications. The amendment, it will be developed to the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trail standards that the original master plan was designed around. So in order to put this amendment together, the city and the county will need to enter into an agreement outlining the roles and responsibilities for the amendment. The agreement states that the county's roles will include providing all necessary information related to the county's trail section being amended, participating in public input meetings, reviewing and approving an amended master plan, paying 100% of the costs related to the county's Fergus Falls to Maplewood State Park trail section, and including all consultant fees and any city expenses related to that work. The city's responsibilities would be similar from the project participation perspective, but there are no costs related to that unless there are costs incurred for amending the city's existing master plan, which we don't expect. So the city would go into a contract with a consultant to amend this master plan, take invoices for the work, and the county would reimburse the city for those costs. There's a copy of the agreement with the county drafted by the county with their signature in your packet. If there are any questions on that, I can answer that or answer any questions.
Does the council have any questions for Ryan on this amendment to the agreement? All right, if not, is there a recommendation, is there a motion to recommend this to the council for approval?
I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Brent and
I'll second it.
Anthony. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries.
All right, so item number 2 then is the contract that would be introduced for the amendment to the master plan. The contract the city would take on and work with the county on. So the second item is recommendation to authorize a contract with HKGI to develop an amendment to the Glacial Edge Trail Master Plan. If you remember, HKGI was the consulting team that developed our downtown master plan and the original Glacial Edge Trail Master Plan. So in order to develop that amendment, the county and the city will enter into that agreement now based off of the previous recommendation. And we would hope to enter into a contract agreement with the consultant here at the end of the month or following a recommendation. The hope is to get it done by no later than, hopefully the end of the year, but no later than January of 2020. There's 4 phases to the work that'll be done. They're going to come in take a similar approach that they did for the full master plan, but it'll be a more condensed scope of work. They already have our existing master plan. They have a lot of work that's already been done from the county's trail master plan. That a lot of the legwork's already been done for kind of looking at the route from a high level perspective. But they will come in, they'll get a project team together, they'll do some data collection and analysis. There will be one public meeting held, kind of just reviewing all the work that has been done and kind of combining them into an amended master plan. There will be presentations to the city council again with the amended master plan or the amendment to the master plan. And there will also be a presentation to the county board of commissioners. The anticipated cost, the quote that we received from HKJ was $23,800. And again, those are all related to the addition of the county's portion of the trail into the master plan. So those would be covered by Otter Tail County. The scope of work and timeline for that contract are included in the packet as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Anyone have any questions on that contract with HKGI? I have a question, Ryan. So, and I think we addressed this before, but by adding the county as, amending this Glacial Edge Trail Master Plan, do we, when we submit requests for funding, do we work with the county? I guess my question is we want, extend this up to Maplewood, or do we have a way to ensure that, how do I say this, priorities, that we're not left out, like it's our original plan, but we're not going to be sending funds up to Maplewood and coming back this way? Does that make sense?
That does make sense, and I've been working with not only the county, but the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission on discussing this amended master plan. And one of the things that we'll have to work out in the amendment is we have this agreement now to do the amendment, but there will likely be another agreement in that amendment that kind of outlines the city and county's roles for future applications, maintenance, that sort of stuff. So we would discuss at that time, the city will still apply for these sections, the county will still apply for, the county will then apply for their sections, and
Sure.
we'll have to work that out as far as how we phase things.
Sure.
In the amended.
Cooperation's great, and it's a great overall project. I just want to kind of be selfish, I guess, to make sure that we still take care of the needs in Fergus Falls. So there's a way to do that, though.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Ryan? Scott?
Ryan, I think you said that the cost for the contract was $23,000, but that Otter Tail County would reimburse the city for that cost. Did I understand that right?
That's correct. So the quote that we got, the scope of work in this contract is just related to the expenses for adding the county's trail in that runs along County Road 1 and County Road 3 from the city limits to Maplewood State Park. So all of the work to get that section of trail amended into our master plan would be the $23,800, and those costs would be covered by Otter Tail County. If during the process there were any costs that were incurred for the city's existing trail portions, those would be covered by the city, but we don't anticipate there being any review or amendments to the city's existing plan. We're just adding in that county portion to the trail.
Any other questions for Ryan? If not, is there a motion to recommend this authorization of the contract to the full council on Monday?
All for that, Your Honor.
Thanks, Justin.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Caroline. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. And Ryan, you have one more item for us.
Yes, so the third item is an introduction to our newest application draft. I'm working on a draft application to the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails fiscal year 2021. The third item is a recommendation to authorize or to make a resolution approving the application to GMRPTC fiscal year 2021. So I'll just kind of go through a little bit of the background of the trail. We kind of talked about it already through the first two items, but the master plan for the Glacial Edge Trail was adopted in 2017. There's 4 phases to our master plan. South segment is the stretch from Highway 210, Central Lakes area, out to Veterans Park. The central section is from Veterans Park all the way up to the corner of Tower Avenue and Fir Avenue, near the Productive Alternatives area. The north central phase then goes from there through the Kirkbride over towards Woodland Heights, and the far north section is from that all the way over to the County Road 1 trail, which we discussed in the amended master plan resolution. The funding sources for these various phases have been, we've been seeking grants for any of the work on the trail. Those are really the only sources that have been identified as grants. So our grant history, we've applied for a few grants. We have had varying success. The first grant we applied for was Transportation Alternatives. It's federal dollars that we applied for that southern section from the Central Lakes Trail to Veterans Park. We applied for that back in 2017. We weren't successful on that one at the time, but we hope to apply again this year. We skipped last year, but hope to apply again this year. We have been successful in getting a $600,000 LCCMR grant that'll be for fiscal year 2019 through 2021, and that's for the stretch of trail through downtown from Veterans Park to Union Avenue. And then there's GMRPTC, that's the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails. We applied last year for fiscal year 2020 funding. We were unsuccessful with that grant. The only feedback we had was we had a lack of local matching commitment for the application. Other than that, they were okay with our application. So looking to apply again for 2021. There will just be a few modifications to our application based off of feedback from GMRPTC and some of the work that we've been doing at the dairy site. So the 2021 GMRPTC application, it'll be for a project that's a part of phase 2. So the phase 2 of the trail was from Veterans Park all the way up to Tower and Fir Ave. We're not going to be applying for that entire stretch. We already have some LCCMR funds for a portion of phase 2, and we're going to try to take a smaller chunk out of phase 2 with GMRPTC application. And I have a map of the project area in a few slides, but it would be the project for the application would be from Union Avenue to the Otter Tail County Historical Society. It's a 1.5 mile stretch from the edge of downtown through the dairy site and up to the County Historical Society. It includes about a third of a mile of on-road bike facilities and sidewalk improvements along Stanton and either Broadway or Buse, depending on how the alignment works with the dairy redevelopment. There's a 1.11 mile multi-use path then that would run through the dairy site and up to the County Historical Society along St. Andrew Street. The project also includes 2 trailheads, one at the dairy site and one at the Historical Society. And the application will also request funds for signage, intersection improvements, and there's costs in there for design and engineering as well. So the project area is the red circle there. I have a zoomed in version on the next map, but as you can see, it's just kind of about a third maybe of that phase 2, the blue section from downtown up to Tower and Fir Ave. So here's a detailed map of what we're looking for. It's very similar to last year's application, like I said. It starts at Union Avenue, just west of downtown, runs through the dairy site. The difference from last year to this year, though, is we are extending the project beyond the dairy up to the Otter Tail County Historical Society. So last year's we just ended it in the dairy site before crossing the railroad back to the north. So we're going to add that section back in. It'll add a natural connection to a proposed trailhead at the County Historical Society. We'll still have trailheads on both sides. It'll also add natural connections into the trail running along Lincoln Avenue out towards the mall, which then connects down to the Tower Road Trail. So some better connectivity. And so the budget, these are estimates that were, I started with our budget estimates from the master plan, and the estimates were edited for inflation. So these are the budget estimates that we would ask for a fiscal year 2021 project for GMRPTC. So I mentioned on-street bike facilities, we would have an estimate of $37,885. Sidewalk installation, $23,445. The bulk of the project would be the shared use path, basically the multi-use trail construction, $312,389. The 2 trailheads would have a total cost of $3,247. $3,572 for wayfinding and signage across the trail project. $64,729 is the estimate for intersection improvements. And then the GMRPTC funding does have an allowance for reimbursement of design and engineering costs up to 20%, but our master plan was using estimates for 18% of the cost. So the total project cost would be $525,417, and based off of our feedback from last year's application, I would include in this recommendation for a resolution to also approve budgeting for a match of 5% for this project in 2021. So there are 3 levels of matching percentages that can be applied for GMRPTC funding. 5 to 9% gets you 5%, or 5 to 9% of a match gives you 5 extra points in your competitive scoring. 10 to 15, I think, gets you another 5 points, and then beyond that, you get an additional 5 points. You can get a maximum of 15 points in your application score. We're just asking for the minimum 5% for 5 points towards our application. And so that's all that I have prepared for that. I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Anthony, you have a question?
Right, Ryan, on I suppose partly for Bill too, that 26,000, where would that come from? And what's in that fund? And is it worthy of looking at kind of trying to get 10 points, if we doubled it to 50,000 or 52?
So what we would look at is actually budgeting for that in 2021. So not this year's budget cycle, but the following one, we have to build that into our budget. Now that could be twofold. One would be we simply increase the budget for that match. 2, we would of course explore existing budgets like the park and recreation area, the capital outlay area of that, which is usually spoken for. That we budget $45,000 a year for capital repairs to our existing park buildings. But we look at what's on the docket for 2021. Could any of that be used towards this, and budget extra? So a combination of the 2. Mm-hmm. So one other I'm going to talk about here, crushed concrete a little bit. One thing Ryan is exploring with them is the recycled crushed concrete from the demo at the dairy site. Could that qualify as a match as well? We don't have an answer on that yet, but certainly if they do approve that, that could be anywhere $50,000 to $75,000 worth of material. So looking at that, if we get the green light from them, of course we'll build that into the grant as well. But it'd be up to you as a council. Would you like to see us, we'd be committing to that, so then we'd be making a commitment for 2021 if we wanted to increase that to a 10% match or not. So.
And kind of private funds, I mean, if we raised kind of money, can that be used as a match?
I'm sure I would say yes to that, right?
Can be used as a match too. There hasn't been any private funds identified, but that would count as a local match.
Is there, I know talking about crossing the railroad tracks, is that still kind of an issue with this project, or where do we sit on that?
There's been more discussion with the railroad as the dairy project has advanced. It's certainly a need. We have to be able to cross the railroad in 2 locations to get this trail built. We have 2 years to figure that out, and we've had a lot of good conversations with the railroad, I think, with the advancing of the dairy project, so
Okay.
it shouldn't be a problem in 2021, but right now, yeah, we need two crossings somewhere.
Okay.
When is the deadline for the submission of the application?
The application is due August 2nd, and we hope to hear back sometime later in the fall, I think, mid to late November. I think they usually hear, cities will hear the status of the application.
And when do you anticipate having an answer on the crushed concrete?
I'm hoping soon. I reached out a couple weeks ago, connected with Joe from GMRPTC a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure with the 4th of July, he had some difficulty contacting all the commission members, but hoping soon before our application's due for sure.
Sure. So maybe it would be appropriate for us to approve the contract with the 5%. Hopefully, hear something back from the from them on that crushed concrete, and then discuss on Monday night whether or not we want to up that to 10%, and whether we think that's something we should do to increase our chances with the application. Bill?
And Ryan, do you have a feeling about the 5 or the 10% to share with the council as far as has Greater Minnesota Parks and Trail given you indication a 5% match? I guess what are our chances? Is there any indication between a 5 or a 10% match?
There's not a lot of indication. I don't think they prefer as much match as possible, I think,
Sure.
so they don't really want to give, good vibes for lower matching. But, as we've been talking with them throughout the development of our master plan and keeping them updated on all of the work that the city's done with acquisition of the dairy property and the costs with all of that and the master plan, I think they understand we have put in a lot of costs to this project already.
Mm-hmm.
Those can't be considered a match because they were spent before the project period. So we can't really use that in our application, but we're hoping that there's some understanding from them that we have a lot of commitment, just not necessarily in the time
Good point on that.
project.
Yeah.
So they appreciate what we've done on the dairy. And
We just can't use
Yep.
that necessarily.
The other
in our
thing that maybe we
application.
could bring on Monday night to the discussion, if we recommend this to the council, is maybe you could give us an idea of, because we're talking about 5 points, 10 points, or potentially, if we had the concrete and the $26,000 match, potentially 15 points, and what difference that could make. And I mean, I'm sure there's prior examples.
Success of the application.
Yeah, prior examples of what the scoring was, where we scored, and what a successful application scored. Is that something you would be able to put together by
Yes.
Monday night? So maybe we can approve this and bring it in, then we can have a little bit deeper
Yep.
discussion on Monday night if whether we want to increase that or not. Someone want to offer a
I'll make that.
motion to
I'll
bring
make
it to
that
the council?
motion.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Tom. Any other questions before we move on? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you, Ryan, and we'll continue this discussion Monday night.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work on this. Next item on the agenda is Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee update, and we have Jake Crone and Patrick Hollister here. Jake, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, committee members. I'm here on behalf of the BPAC to ask for your consideration to begin discussion on adding bike lanes to West Lincoln Avenue. This item came up probably somewhat to the chagrin of Brian. We never like to, at the BPAC, let a good road construction project go to waste. So with the work that's going to be done on West Lincoln Avenue from Broadway out to the interstate, we wanted the council to consider the possibility of adding bike lanes to part of that segment, but then also to consider a little additional segment reaching from Union Avenue up to Broadway in an effort to make it a more coherent, complete bike network for that portion of the city. So what I did, or we talked about at a couple of BPAC meetings, was just some geometric designs that were put together using this program called Street Mix that just kind of gives a cross segment of what the lanes look like given the widths of the streets at various sections along that route. And so these are by no means final designs, and there's definitely a lot of things that need to be figured out with that, but it gives you an idea of what something like this could look like. you'll see immediately that these are a little bit different than the bike lanes that we know about and have already that are on Cascade and College Way, and that these are protected bike lanes. Instead of the bicycle being located, the bike lane being located between the parked car and traffic, it's the parked car and a little bit of extra buffer space that offsets the bike lanes from the traffic lanes. We feel that this is warranted given the just the nature of the street geometry along West Lincoln and the higher speeds that are sometimes seen along that segment as compared to a place like Cascade where you have stop signs and other things that give you a sense of need to travel a little bit slower along that stretch of the street. We feel like that this would be a safer design, and we're also very conscious in putting this together of not taking away anything that's already there. All the existing street parking that is in place remains. It's simply shifted out to make room for the bike lane, and the biggest change, I guess, would be that the wider segment of Lincoln Avenue, which is kind of after Buse or a little bit farther west, where typically the street widens out and there are two driving lanes there. We suggest changing that to a single driving lane in each direction with a middle turn lane. It's commonly called a 4-3 conversion. It happens quite a bit on roads where the geometry is allows for that, and then the addition of the bike lanes in the remaining space left over. So that's kind of where we're at, and again, this is also kind of done in the service of a vision, kind of a master vision document that Fergus Falls and BPAC worked on in conjunction several years ago. I don't know if that's included in did you include that PowerPoint, that map? There it is, yeah, right there. Where we just kind of identified key routes through the city that we would, at some point, like to focus our attentions to kind of build out a more coherent, comprehensive bike infrastructure network throughout the city. And so on this map right here, the darker blue lines are kind of places where bike infrastructure already exists. So you can see the Cascade Street bike lanes, you can see the Lincoln Avenue, some of the improvements we've done as far as sharrows and everything. The lighter blue lines are places that we've identified as deserving of some future attention. We don't know, we never really specified exactly what, but it's no surprise that these are kind of major routes through the city, just like people who drive cars use bicyclists also need to get places too. So we identified some of the major routes that we would like to see improved, and whenever an opportunity to improve one of these routes comes up through things like road construction, resurfacing, things like that, we try to take advantage of that so as to try to piggyback on the work, and also at the same time being knowledgeable that we at this point don't have the momentum or quite frankly the money to do much more than lay some paint down on the road, which is kind of essentially what this project, something like this, would be. So so as you can see there, the West Lincoln, it forms I think a kind of a necessary link between a downtown area and the western part of town and some of the trails in red that we already have existing, and then also even build upon what was just discussed here with the Glacial Ledge Trail running through and connecting up to kind of the western end of this segment.
Hey, thank you, Jake. So I have a question. So this is a protected bike lane that you guys are proposing, and if I remember correctly, like when we had the discussions on Cascade and the parking, and so what's the thought process or the reasoning behind wanting rather than having just like existing parking and then the bike lane on the street side, traffic side? Is there a reason on this street that this would be preferred, this design, or?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest reason is safety. Okay. I think we agree that the speeds along West Lincoln Avenue are different than, say, the speeds on a street like Cascade Street. Yeah, I think even the design speed probably for this reconstructed segment, I think I saw in some plans, was 35, 40 miles an hour. Okay. Is there a next slide? Did you include that other graph too? On the next slide, yeah, right there, that one. This is a pretty commonly cited data set of fatality rates for pedestrians as traffic speeds increase. And you can see a quite sharp increase in the 30 to 40 mile an hour range, which is precisely kind of the speeds at which traffic along Lincoln Avenue, we would expect to be moving. While a bike lane in between parked cars and traffic may be acceptable on a street like Cascade. I personally wouldn't feel safe sending my son on a bike lane on Union or on West Lincoln where, he's got traffic potentially moving at 40 miles an hour and a parked car on the other side. Giving that little bit of extra separation, either through parked cars or, really on West Lincoln, it's not like it's a solid row of parked cars. So there's going to be a lot of space, but that extra space could make a big difference in how riders, both current riders and future riders who may be interested in, getting out there and riding, but just don't quite feel safe enough, kind of perceive the safety of the street.
And then one other question. So, and then the median, if you will, or if that's what is the barricade?
Yeah.
What is that? What are the different options there as far as?
Right.
I mean, obviously, paint is one option, but
Right.
what are some of the other?
Yeah. There is paint, so a little bit wider, either just a really thick stripe or a couple of stripes with some crosshatch in it, gives you more separation space on the diagrams. I guess I control it from here. I forgot about that. On the diagrams here, I had bollards placed in there, which is a common treatment you'll see in larger cities. That is, that's a kind of a thing that, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we had that. But also realize that may not, be a kind of a first generation thing that we do here. But I think as we continue to evolve our bike infrastructure, I would hope that we would consider things like that more frequently. But really it's the physical separation, the additional space that comes with either having a car parked there or having that just that nice buffer of that parking lane that helps provide a greater degree of safety for the lane.
Sure, thanks, Jake. So I have a question for Brian, if I could. So what's the process that this request is considered and like kind of lay out the process of the design of this street for us, if you would?
Certainly, Your Honor, and good morning, members. We recently discussed this at the BPAC here, and some time ago, we've been talking about this, and I just want to clarify for Jake's comments about my chagrin and everything. It's more so that we're under a contract with a project, like College Way. We have the pre-con and Central Specialties on Tuesday, so that's why my recommendation is the restriping that's proposed is going to match existing. I prefer to do this kind of as a separate entity, moving forward and not to integrate it with this federal aid project. That's a lot of logistics and everything. Furthermore, we got a few things that we're looking at. Lincoln Avenue is 30 mile an hour, but it has the hardest ADTs. Coming up eastbound, going on to Broadway with the intersection, how that's designed, we got to look at that a little bit more in depth. The parking, the bollards, all these things, I prefer more of a systematic approach that we maybe look to do this as a separate project, do some reviews, do some layouts. We're gonna have to hire consultants, not only for bikes, but also cars and everything. Broadway is a difficult intersection, so it's something I would request a little time to analyze and do some layouts, similar to what we did to Cascade. I thought that worked out really good. There was a lot of things we had to resolve and look through, but we did a few layouts and everything. They met More Engineering, who did that one, met with the BPAC a few times, just so everybody, and I thought that was pretty good. That's the process I would like. At this time, with the contract and the pre-con,
So so explain that contract,
we have a contract right now for resurfacing. We're not
and it's
reconstructing.
includes the existing striping. Is that what you're saying? So it would be a change of the
Yes.
contract.
Yes.
And what's the time on the reconstruction of the street?
The resurfacing,
Resurfacing,
we're
okay.
having a pre-con on Thursday, so with the contractor, so I'll have a better understanding. It's resurfacing. Given that corridor and the contractor, I believe once they hear, they'll be fast performing. There is staging and everything, and that's all provide more information. Not saying it couldn't be done, but I'd like a little bit more time to vet how to best do this treatment.
I have a question. So when when you're working on like a resurfacing project like this Lincoln Avenue one, does the BPAC know that that's happening so that they have adequate time to get some of this kind of stuff into contracts? Or are they reacting to projects that are kind of already going?
I am not sure. I don't send an invite or of these projects. We do with the council. I can't recall particularly on Lincoln Avenue when we initiated that project, but every project we do comes with the initiation, ordering the plans and specs, and there's some of that timing right now. So,
is there a way to connect with them sooner on that kind of stuff so that
That's
it's not
something
always
that's-
a reaction?
yeah, I agree. That's something we got to look at moving forward more. it helps both parties.
Yeah.
So,
Your Honor, I have a
yeah, go
question.
ahead.
My concern with like putting a physical bollard there would be, we live in Minnesota and we have 9 months of winter, and you got snow removal, and I think the protected bike lane would be the preferred route, because I think whether it's done with the hash marks but I don't think a physical barrier would. I mean, I just look at the amount of damage that will happen to those, and then there'll be an expense of replacing them. But I think the protected bike lane obviously would be a preferred choice, because I agree with Jake. It's a fast-moving road, and I think that kind of center turning lane would be, because people do that kind of now, in an unofficial way. So. But I agree. I think you need the time to analyze it correctly.
Yeah, just I could. That's a very good point. If you can recall, even in this west parking lot over here, behind the Viking and everything, all the bollards that were in place and everything, and that's very, very problematic for snow removal. So it's that balancing and everything. And I've spoken to Mr. Crone about this before too, and I think we have some compromise.
Yep, sure.
Before, but snow removal is a huge thing we got to consider.
Are these? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Caroline.
I was gonna say, are these bollards? Could they be seasonal? Could you pop them out in the winter months just for snow removal and then get them back in, or does that ruin the base of it, or how does that work?
That's something we'd have to explore, because that would be my preferred if we're going to do it. It's a seasonal thing.
Yeah.
Certainly not year round, because there will be damage,
Right.
if not to all of them. But I don't know what type of devices out there that could maybe be surface mounted, or the spacing and the time effort required to do all that.
Right.
When is the next scheduled? It would also seem to me, if we're going to do this from Broadway to College Way, it'd be nice to have a consistent bike path route through that Lincoln corridor from Union to, that's. So I guess my question is, when would realistically, to kind of look at this and analyze this without throwing off the current project, an ability to look at the stretch from Union Avenue off to College Way? When is that planned on having any work done or restriping, or does that question make sense?
From Union to College Way? Was it Broadway? I think you mean.
To include that, if we're going to look at, if we're looking from Broadway to College Way, correct? But the strip from Union, it would seem to me you'd want to look at the whole corridor if you're going to look at.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about too, even prior to talking with the multi-use trail through the dairy and everything, how that could be incorporated or integrated too. So these are conversations that I think need to be had, and how we could have the connectivity and everything
Sure.
Going with. But that's something we got to take into account, that trail itself too.
Okay. Any other questions, Brent?
Yeah, I got serious concerns with it personally, because, we've got Cavour and we got Stanton. They both run parallel. There's no reason why, signage can't be moved to put people over in those directions. Lincoln Avenue, I do not think is a good spot. I personally would even like to see it removed from downtown. It is too narrow. Even when you put the protected bike paths in, now you move the parked cars out closer to the moving traffic, and I live at the spot where it's wide. When they're coming downtown, they will gush up to 45, 50 miles an hour to get in front of the car on the side of them. And on the same thing coming out of downtown, they're in a hurry. The car in front of them's going too slow. The minute they go wide, they gun that thing and take off. Now, you start moving parked cars closer to these people, now nobody can get out of their cars, because, even in the wide spots, I see people sitting there waiting because they immediately come over. On Lincoln Avenue, everybody is in a hurry. Even when they did the 30 days of biking, I stayed up on the sidewalks. Except for downtown where you can't drive on the sidewalks, I'd much rather see people on the sidewalks. So I just feel that moving traffic closer to parked cars is a disaster waiting to happen, and I've seen too many accidents out in front of my house, period, where it starts to get narrow. So I just would rather see signage used to move people over to Cavour, or move them over to Stanton. Same thing, they can get to where they gotta go, or when this bike path goes in, that gives them a third option. Lincoln Avenue, I just think, people are not educated. They don't look for the sharrows on the road or wherever they got. They look for the cars, and it's just the same way. They're not paying attention, and you're gonna put some, like you said, his young son in this path, and somebody's not paying attention, that kid's going to get hit. And I just don't think Lincoln Avenue is a good project for this, and I would not like to see it in there.
Thanks, Brent. Justin?
Good comments on the speed on Lincoln, but, with looking at that bottom design, my understanding though, Brent, it'd be one lane of traffic with that center turn area. So where they pass now, because it goes to 2 lanes, in theory, if I'm reading that right, it would stay single lane traffic with a center turn, correct? Park lane, 1 single lane traffic, and then a turn lane potentially is
What we're showing off there, but that's
Right.
what we gotta look at the layout.
so we wouldn't have that issue of cars trying to speed, get in front of cars because it's only 1 single lane of traffic.
That's just for a short period. The rest of it is going to be still where they move it in, and you're going to have the parked cars right up against the traffic, and I can't see that.
I think another thing that's helpful with that bottom segment with speed of cars is it's almost a natural way to slow vehicles down because it is a little tighter, a little smaller. It's the same road width. It all fits in there. But with that turn lane, people shouldn't be sliding over into that parking lane. So it's just a natural way to keep the cars at 30 miles an hour instead of 40 plus.
Jake, did you have a comment?
I could just respond, that's
Yeah.
exactly, I think Caroline was, I think alluding to that. I think what we're attempting to do here with this idea is just influence the behavior drivers through, just a slightly different street design. So, conceptually, when you're driving, you're presented with a road width like right now. Your lanes are in excess of like probably 20 feet. You've got a lot of room. Interstate lanes are only 12 feet wide, right? So you feel like you are on the interstate highway and you can gun it. This just attempts to psychologically influence the driver's behavior by giving them a prescribed lane width and by also not giving them the freedom of making it feel like they're on the highway and they can gun it. So I don't think you and I are that far apart in how we want to see the Lincoln Avenue, the safety of Lincoln Avenue improve. I think we both agree that speeding is a problem and that putting the vulnerable road users in the way of these speeding cars is a problem. This design is one attempt to address that. And then also just to the other point of yes, we have the trails to the dairy, and I personally, there's going to be beautiful. I can't wait to ride it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But I also want the city to realize and to continue to normalize the behavior of cyclists elsewhere on our road system. This is something that should be designed and made for all users of the road, not just drivers. So you need to recognize that cyclists are their employees, they're consumers. Their moms, their dads, they're people who want to get around town. And just as drivers appreciate having a direct, convenient, and safe way to go from point A to point B, so do bikers. Yeah, you could shunt us off to Stanton, you could shunt people off onto Cabor. But, at the same token, why do we set up this two-class system of if it's okay to shunt the bikers off but let the drivers continue to use this route, why can't cyclists also be afforded some of the conveniences that we afford the drivers, given that we have these extremely wide roads that, quite frankly, lead to very unsafe driving behavior that we could, possibly influence and change by doing something like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Can I just mention 2 things
Yeah, you
quickly?
bet.
One more of a comment and one question for Jake. I think Brian was alluding to this earlier, but when we hire a consultant, or if we hire a consultant, we have to keep in mind, in this discussion today, we have had no input or feedback from people that are living in this area, short of Councilmember Thompson's comments. This is, for lack of a better term, a fairly radical shift in how this road would be used, and it will alter the way people that live and own property in this area can use their property and or use the front of their home. So I think let's make sure that we have a deliberate attempt to get feedback before we make any decisions on any of this. That's my comment, I guess. My question for Jake would be, do you have an example of a street in a nearby town or something that we would be familiar with that uses this protected bike lane with the vehicles parked 6.5 to 7.5 feet what will feel like in the middle of the road, but that far from the curb, just so maybe we can see something in action or be familiar, so we can start wrapping our heads around it. Because this will be something that'll take getting used to, and will take some, certainly a level of buy-in. And I think if we can experience that on an existing street, or look at that, or see that in action, I think that'll help people wrap their heads around it. So I don't know if there's an example that's top of mind or not.
I don't have one right now.
Okay.
But certainly, there's Google image search. We can find lots. Minneapolis has, a lot of examples of this. And Patrick is probably better versed in the nearby communities than I am. He may have some ideas.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the council. Patrick Hollister, member of the BPAC. The closest example geographically that I can think of to Fergus Falls, although it is slightly different, would be Glenwood, and they just did it last summer. Now, the difference with Glenwood, I think geometrically it's similar to these examples, but the difference with Glenwood is that the bike lane is actually above the curb. But there are the parked cars between the moving cars and the bikes. It's just that if visually, or mentally, if you elevate that bicyclist to be at curb level, that's essentially what Glenwood did last summer. In fact, if anybody here is interested, we're working on a similar project to this in Pelican Rapids right now. And this coming Monday, July 15th, we will be touring downtown Glenwood from 1 to 3. And anybody who is interested in that is welcome to join us. Just show up in downtown Glenwood at 1 o'clock. We'll find you. It's not a very big place. And you're welcome to join the tour. We're going to be talking about the infrastructure itself and the impact that it seems to have had so far on the community. So that would be Monday, July 15th, 1 p.m. Meet us in downtown Glenwood. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. So, in the interest of moving along on the agenda, I think takeaways for me, and anyone else feel free to add, continue the discussion of, probably outside of this immediate project and the restriping, just because of the contracts, but I think it's a good conversation to have, and I would include Union all the way out to Broadway. But then also a takeaway is, as we're doing reconstruction, resurfacing of projects, let's make sure that the BPAC and any other organizations, including the neighborhood, everyone's involved in the discussion, so we can have discussions that would be timely and able to have results within the time frame of a project. Fair enough?
Yes.
I just got one comment. I mean, a lot of people think I'm against biking. I mean, before I moved up here, I lived in Centerville, and I pretty much got a Raleigh. When I got off work, I drove my bike everywhere. This, as far as I'm concerned, for me, is strictly a safety factor. That's the biggest reason why I pushed for that one in downtown Lincoln. To me, it's strictly a safety factor. I just don't want somebody, I'd love to see people on their bikes going everywhere. And as far as cars taking priority, I'm not putting priority over the cars. Most people, a lot of people don't pay attention. They're in a hurry to get somewhere, and I'm worried about the people on the bikes, especially your kids, especially mine.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Brian.
Just in closing, Your Honor, if I may, is I'll work with Interstate as well. A few things I want to identify, what we have currently in the plans.
Sure.
And what may be needed to replicate something like this and report back.
That'd be great, Brian. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the discussion, Jake and Patrick. Next item on the agenda is code enforcement discussion. April Zumhoff. Good morning, April.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. I've just come to you for some guidance and for direction to help me as a code enforcement officer enforce the code fairly, effectively, and consistently. I had brought to several of the coworkers here, our city staff, and Andrew as well, just some things that I'm getting complaints about and conflicting ways that we have enforced them currently in the past and going forward. And if this is something that we want to take a look at to review, revamp. So I'm just going to jump right in here and show you guys some examples and our code language.
April, before you do that, Your Honor,
Absolutely.
members, does it make sense to push this discussion to a different day, knowing that we've lost half of the members? And I think, yeah, and I think it's a big enough issue that everybody needs to hear it.
Yep, and there's several council members that I have worked with too that are very aware of this issue that aren't here now, that are not here.
I agree. I
So-
think that's a good point. And so unless anyone has any objections, or if, we can move this to Monday night, actually, right? We'll move to Monday night, and we have a road swap, and that can wait till Monday night as well to discuss, Brian?
Yeah,
That's
or
just
a
an
later
update.
time. It was just information.
That's just an informational thing. So is there anything else
available?
pressing that needs
I'm
to?
fine if you guys want to take this to another
Thanks for
committee.
sitting through the first hour and 15 minutes of the meeting.
Committee of the whole, I'm fine with that as well, because this is not a pressing item, but it's
So it
something
could
I'd
be-
like to discuss.
We'll wait to the
You
next,
guys-
yeah,
you
we'll
guys
put it on the next
determine.
committee of the whole. So you won't see it on Monday night, but I think this is a better setting to do a full-scale presentation. And so 2 weeks from now, or whenever the next committee of the whole meeting is.
All right, perfect. Anything else pressing to come before this committee? Thanks for being patient, April.
Absolutely, anytime, guys.
We're adjourned.